Gyeongju, a city that holds 1,000 years of history. The cherished values preserved over time have shaped who we are today. Now, through new encounters, we step into a better future. Sustainability, innovation. With the spirit of connection, a new millennium story begins. As APEC and Gyeongju come together, APEC meets Gyeongju.
South Korea and the U.S. have agreed to pursue a standalone agreement for bilateral cooperation for Seoul to build nuclear-powered submarines. Working-level talks will begin early next year. A filibuster by the main opposition People Power Party has come to an end, paving the way for the ruling Democratic Party's bill on punitive damages for false information to be passed. The South Korean won on Wednesday posted its biggest gain in more than 3 years against the U.S. dollar after local authorities issued a strong warning against excessive weakness of the currency. Senior security officials from Seoul and Washington recently discussed a follow-up to what's been agreed at the top level, with talks centered on speeding up bilateral cooperation on nuclear-powered submarines. For that, a U.S. team will visit Korea early next year. Our correspondent Yoon Jung-min reports.
Following a recent trip to Washington, National Security Advisor Ri Sung-rak noted that South Korea and the U.S. have agreed to pursue a separate agreement for bilateral cooperation for Seoul to build nuclear-powered submarines. He held a press briefing on Wednesday, saying that he had in-depth talks with his American counterpart, Marco Rubio, and U.S. Energy Secretary Chris Wright for follow-up measures to the allies' joint fact sheet.
When it comes to the reprocessing of spent fuel and uranium enrichment, I explained the fact that our president has emphasized his will for non-proliferation multiple times. We also stressed that it amounts to bilateral strategic cooperation for energy security.
With the current bilateral nuclear energy pact, banning the transfer of nuclear material for military purposes, the top security advisor mentioned the case of Australia being granted an exception in acquiring nuclear-powered submarines. He also noted that Seoul does not consider securing highly enriched uranium to fuel a sub. Instead, it plans to use low-enriched uranium. A U.S. delegation will visit Korea early next year for working-level consultations to speed up the process. On top of that, resuming dialogue with North Korea was high on the agenda as he met UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres in New York.
With various diplomatic opportunities in mind for the first half of next year, we discussed ways to cooperate with the U.S. to resume dialogue with North Korea.
When asked, the official said no discussion was made on whether to adjust the Seoul-Washington joint military exercises to bring Pyongyang back to the negotiating table. We also visited Canada and Japan in time for his U.S. trip, where he discussed defense partnership with Ottawa as Seoul seeks to take part in its diesel submarine project, and shared consensus with Tokyo on continuing the so-called shuttle diplomacy at the top level. When it comes to the recent controversy over what's seen as friction within government ministries over North Korea policy, we remained tight-lipped, saying that it's undesirable to publicly reveal confusion, as he stressed the importance of coordination. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
The ruling Democratic Party today passed a bill aimed at tackling false information, but the opposition People Power Party calls the act unconstitutional. Our Kim Bo-kyung reports.
After putting an end to the filibuster that reached its 24-hour limit, the ruling Democratic Party put a revised Information and Communications Network Act to a vote, leading to a passage at around Wednesday noon.
I hereby declare that the amendment to the alternative bill for the partial revision of the Act on the Promotion of Information and Communications Network, Utilization, and Information Protection has been passed, with 170 votes in favor, 3 against, and 4 abstentions, out of 177 members present.
The core of the bill is to prohibit the distribution of false or manipulated information that infringes on others' rights or the public interest with the intent to cause harm or gain unjust benefits. It includes a clause to impose punitive damages of up to 5 times the victim's losses on those who intentionally spread false or manipulated information. The People Power Party lawmakers boycotted the vote, and the party's floor leader said the bills, including one to establish a special tribunal dedicated to insurrection cases that passed the plenary session on Tuesday, are clearly unconstitutional, and that the party will urge the president to veto. The ruling Democratic Party had unilaterally passed a bill on Tuesday to set up a special tribunal to handle insurrection cases stemming from former President Yoon Suk-yeol's martial law declaration.
I hereby declare that the amendment to the Special Act on the establishment of a special martial law tribunal and the protection of whistleblowers regarding the martial law bid by Yoon Suk-yeol has been passed.
Lawmakers voted 175 for and 2 against, with 2 abstentions, as the People Power Party boycotted the vote. The bill calls for the establishment of at least 2 special tribunals, each at the Seoul Central District Court and the Seoul High Court, to handle cases of alleged insurrection, treason, and rebellion. Accusing the DP of trying to take control over the judiciary, the lawmakers of the PPP had staged a filibuster to block the bill, with the party's leader Jang Dong-hyuk setting a new record for the longest filibuster speech, speaking for 24 hours, only to be stopped on Tuesday noon. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
South Korea's presidential office is returning to its former name, the Blue House or Cheongwadae, from next Monday after more than 3.5 years. The presidential spokesperson's office issued a notice on the matter to reporters on Wednesday afternoon. It added that the presidential flag bearing 2 phoenixes, currently flown at the Yongsan presidential office, will be lowered at midnight on December 29th. At the same time, the same flag will be raised at the Blue House. As we wrap up the year and prepare for next, Arirang News spoke with a veteran diplomat turned academic to reflect on Korea's diplomatic standing today and its policy direction for 2026. Amid ongoing global challenges, our Oh Soo-young has more.
South Korea's expanding global role is bringing new diplomatic leadership expectations as cooperation with the European Union takes on greater strategic importance. Michael Reiterer, a former European Union ambassador to South Korea and now a professor at the Brussels School of Governance, specializing in Northeast Asia's geopolitical dynamics, said South Korea's economic and democratic standing is driving new expectations.
What is essential is that Korea takes up shoulders the responsibility which comes when you are the 10th or 11th largest economy in the world. That brings responsibility. And one of the responsibilities is that you have a broader outlook on the region and on the world.
A broader outlook is necessary as Washington's latest national security strategy brings about geopolitical uncertainty, as the document's omission of crucial security matters raises questions about how the United States views partnerships with its allies. Concerns are growing across Northeast Asia and Europe as North Korea and Russia deepen military cooperation. Amid Russia's war in Ukraine, Pyongyang has supplied artillery and troops to Moscow, and in turn has received political and technological support that could potentially enhance the North Korean regime's weapons of mass destruction. Here, coordination is essential between Seoul and Brussels.
The European Union is supporting Korean policy on the Korean Peninsula. in order to achieve peace and also to work towards stability, where denuclearization remains a long-term goal.
While countries increasingly pursue self-reliance and nationalism, writer has stressed that cooperation is key.
Strategic autonomy, I must admit I don't like that term. I prefer to talk about strategic responsibility. Responsibility means you have to take action, you have to be an active part. We need rule of law. We have to avoid that we have a policy of might is right. And I think this is something where European Union and the Republic of Korea can work hand in hand, as other strategic partners in the region, for instance, Japan. So the cooperation between Japan and Korea is essential for the stability in Northeast Asia.
Beyond traditional security, he said, countries must build economic resilience together.
We do not need deglobalization, we need more cooperation in order to achieve more security and resilience. So that's something which we need not only in terms of security, I mean hard security, we also need it in terms of economic security. So the organizing supply chains and also production chains has become an essential part of security politics.
Technology sits at the center of that shift. South Korea is a global leader in semiconductors and advanced manufacturing, producing about 60% of the world's memory chips.
We are all used to the saying, it's the economy stupid, and I would change that to, it's the technology stupid. And there, Korea is not stupid because it is a leading country, and if the European Union and Korea join their efforts, I think that can make a contribution, and also to the security of both countries.
South Korea has joined Horizon Europe, the EU's €95 billion research programme. Seoul and Brussels are also preparing to launch the EU-Korea Technology Council at a ministerial level. Reuters says as cooperation expands into strategic areas, the two sides must lead on upholding international frameworks while shaping new standards, including on artificial intelligence. Reuters says Seoul is well positioned to do so, having also proven its democratic resilience this year, while restoring confidence in its role in global governance with the successful hosting of APEC following months of political turbulence after martial law last year.
The important task of the new president was to give the clear signal that Korea is back, that there is no sustained problem with democracy, and that Korea can play an international role.
Looking ahead, with geopolitical and economic uncertainty set to continue next year, 2026 is expected to be a test of how firmly South Korea anchors its expanded role on the world stage. Usyang, Arirang News.
The South Korean currency has regained some ground against the U.S. dollar, following related measures by relevant authorities to stabilize the foreign exchange market. Park Jun-han has more.
Foreign exchange rate bodies here have announced that action would be taken to stabilize the country's FX market. The Ministry of Economy and Finance and the Bank of Korea said in a joint release on Wednesday that a weak Korean won was not desirable, and the government's commitment to addressing this would be seen soon. Following the announcement, the US dollar plunged by 33.81 from Tuesday's close to below 1,451 on Wednesday. The exchange rate had closed above 1,481 on Monday and Tuesday for the first time since the March 2009 global financial crisis. On Wednesday morning, the Ministry of Economy and Finance announced tax incentives to counter the recent weakness of the won against major currencies. The plan was introduced to revitalize the domestic stock market by bringing back retail investors who have been buying overseas shares. Under the Reshoring Investment Account, or RIA, The government will offer a temporary 20% capital gains tax exemption on proceeds of overseas stock sales after the standard deduction. To be eligible, individual investors have to sell their foreign shares held as of December 23rd, convert the proceeds into Korean won, and reinvest them in domestic equities for at least 1 year. The ministry said the specific figures for the tax benefits will be finalized after further review. In a separate meeting, Deputy Finance Minister for International Affairs Choi Ji-young warned market participants to be mindful that expectations of further depreciation of the won could lead to unfavorable outcomes. The government expects Wednesday's plan to redirect part of the end of the third quarter value of retail overseas holdings, totaling $161 billion, back into domestic markets, easing concerns over the won's weakness while strengthening support for the benchmark Kospi, which is up 71% to date this year. 박준환, Arirang News.
The South Korean government has decided to extend fuel tax cuts for 2 more months in an effort to stabilize the fuel prices amid a recent surge in petroleum prices led by the weakening Korean won. The cuts reduce gasoline taxes by 7% and diesel and liquefied petroleum gas by 10%. The government announced that the measure will be extended to the end of February next year, saying it's expected to keep prices down by 57 won per liter for gasoline, 58 won for diesel, and 21 for LPG. Meanwhile, tax cuts on individual car purchases have also been extended by 6 months as part of efforts to support a vehicle sales recovery. The tax rate, originally set at 5%, has been lowered to 3.5%. The measure was set to expire at the end of this year but has been extended through June 30th next year. The number of newborns in South Korea rose on-year for the 16th month in a row in October. Now, experts say that this stems from a steady increase in the number of marriages. An Sung-jin has the details.
South Korea in October saw a rise in the number of births on-year for the 16th consecutive month. According to the data ministry on Wednesday, the number of newborns in October 2025 reached 21,958. That's a 2.5% increase compared to the same month last year. It also marks the highest number for the month of October since 2020. The cumulative number of newborns from January to October this year stands at nearly 213,000, a 6.5% increase from the same period last year. The numbers dipped in 2023, figures began recovering in 2024. If the current momentum continues, 2025 as a whole may mark the second consecutive year of growth. An official from the data ministry said that as the number of marriages has been in an upward trend for 19 consecutive months, the number of newborns may have also been positively affected. One expert noticed something similar but offered caution.
Childbirths and marriages that were postponed during the COVID-19 pandemic are resuming, but what's noteworthy is that the birth rate is gradually slowing. This might suggest that the momentum for postponing childbirths is fading.
October saw nearly 20,000 marriages, a slight increase of 0.2% on-year. Meanwhile, the total fertility rate, the average number of children a woman is expected to have in her lifetime, rose to 0.81 in October, an increase of 0.02 from a year earlier. An Sung-jin, Arirang News.
President Lee Jae-myung met with patients suffering from rare diseases and their families this Christmas Eve and promised greater support. Meeting some 30 people at a hospital in Seoul, Lee acknowledged their financial burden, noting that patients with rare diseases tend to get less support for being small in numbers. He added that the government is preparing policies to improve treatment, diagnosis, and welfare support as they listen to their needs and demands to make sure they are reflected in the policies. Following his order of a complete blockade of sanctioned oil tankers to and from Venezuela, U.S. President Donald Trump now says the airspace around the Latin American country should be considered closed. Yun-jin reports.
U.S. officials and flight tracking data confirmed on Tuesday that the U.S. moved large numbers of special operations aircraft, troops, and equipment into the Caribbean this week as U.S. President Donald Trump continues to build pressure on Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. A U.S. official said at least 10 CV-22 Osprey tilt-rotor aircraft, which are used by special operations forces, were flown into the region on Monday night. Flight tracking data confirmed that a C-17 cargo aircraft also arrived in Puerto Rico on Monday. Though details haven't been revealed, another U.S. official has confirmed the transportation of military personnel and equipment on planes. The U.S. has also been pouring additional firepower into the region, including squadrons of jet fighters, electronic warfare planes, and rescue helicopters. Though the spokesperson for the U.S. military in Latin America declined to answer questions, the nature of the aircraft, operation units and bases involved, and their movements suggest that the Trump administration has already decided on a course of action and forces are being positioned to take action. The units involved include those trained to support high-risk infiltration and extraction missions and provide close air and combat support. This is seen as the Trump administration's continued efforts to increase pressure on Maduro as the U.S. seized another oil tanker last week, representing a major escalation of tension between the two nations. On Monday, Trump referred to the U.S. warships in the Caribbean, which include 5 destroyers, an aircraft carrier strike group, and a marine amphibious ready group, as a massive armada and the biggest ever in South America, adding that a similar program would start on land, suggesting the possibility of land strikes. The Trump administration has designated Maduro's government as a foreign terrorist organization, accusing Venezuela of using oil revenues to fund drug-related crimes, including drug shipments into the U.S. 이은진, Arirang News.
The National Museum of Contemporary Art in South Korea hit a record number of visitors this year, exceeding 3.37 million. According to the museum on Wednesday, the figure up to the 20th of this month saw a record high since its opening, a 15% increase compared to last year. And now those in their 20s and 30s made up over 63% of the visitors. And the museum was most crowded from 3 to 4 p.m. on weekends. Foreign visitors totaled more than 210,000, making up over 6% of the overall crowd. The most popular exhibition this year was the Rammuik exhibition held at the Seoul branch, drawing the largest crowds. Culinary Class Wars Season 2 reached number 1 on Netflix's non-English series chart in its first week. Netflix said the hit cooking competition topped the category with 5.5 million views 1 week after its release on last Tuesday. The series currently ranks number 1 in Korea, Hong Kong, Singapore, and Taiwan. The latest series features top culinary figures, including Michelin-star restaurant chefs Lee Jun and Son Jung-won, and Venerable Hanje in an intense competition.
In Seoul, the daytime temperature climbed to 6 degrees Celsius, which is slightly warmer than usual for this time of year. However, don't get too comfortable. A powerful cold snap is on its way for Christmas Day tomorrow. Seoul will wake up to -4 degrees, a sharp drop from today, and temperature will struggle to rise above -1 degree in the afternoon. While Christmas Day will be mostly sunny across the country, snow is expected along the west coast. The mountainous areas of Jeju Island could see more than 15 centimeters of snow, while 2 to 7 centimeters are expected around the west coast of the Jeollado provinces. Sub-zero cold will be seen tomorrow morning in many areas, with Chuncheon and Daejeon at -3 degrees. Daily highs will rise up to 4 degrees in Gwangju, 5 degrees in Daegu and Gyeongju. The cold will tighten its grip on Friday when the morning temperature in Seoul is expected to drop to minus 12 degrees. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
That is all we have for tonight. I'm Kim Da-mi. Thanks for watching and Merry Christmas.
Time to set the facts straight. Get Korea right. K-culture is sweeping the globe. K-pop, K-drama, K-movie, K-food, and even K-beauty. Korean cultural content is gaining more and more fans worldwide. It's indeed the golden age of K-culture. But with this growing interest comes an increase in misinformation about Korea. There's so much inaccurate information out there. Even AI can sometimes get it wrong. So, we must set things straight and correct all the misinformation. So here's the plan. The Voluntary Agency Network of Korea, VANK, and Arirang TV present the Get Korea Right project. Our goal is to provide accurate information on important keywords that come to mind when we think of Korea. Blatant errors and false claims that distort history. It's time to set the record straight, sharing the true history and culture of Korea while raising the national brand. Let's get started with Get Korea Right. Are you ready to join?
Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mo-kyan. As 2025 comes to a close, Korea's economy is ending the year on a stronger note than many had expected. After weathering a storm of global uncertainties, the country's economy has not only stabilized but made historic strides. Exports are on the verge of surpassing $700 billion for the first time ever, and the Kospi has broken past the 4,000 mark, signaling renewed investor confidence. Now, with the South Korea-U.S. tariff deal now finalized and inflation somewhat under control, attention is turning to what lies ahead. How much of this momentum is sustainable and what risks still linger beneath the surface? For answers to this, we are joined by Yang Jun-seok, professor of economics at the Catholic University of Korea, here in the studio with us. A big welcome.
Happy to be here.
And also, we're going to connect to Professor Hwa-Kyun Kim, professor of banking and finance at Texas A&M University's Mays Business School. Good to see you, Professor.
Good to see you again.
So let's start with Professor Yang. So after a rocky start to the year, where do you say the Korean economy is standing right now? How would you evaluate it?
Okay, well, at the beginning of the year, we're going through the aftermath of the martial law and going through the impeachment trials. Because of that, we had a very tough domestic economy. Our growth rate was expected to be around 2.0% when the year ended last year. But at the beginning of this year, that expected growth rate fell below 1%. And then, not exactly the beginning of the year, but from April, we had the Trump tariffs to worry about. So we were worried that perhaps exports would have a minus growth rate. But at the end of the year, I think we recovered pretty much from the martial law and the impeachment trials. Our growth rate this year will not be spectacular, but at least it will be perhaps better than the 0.8% that we have been estimating for most of the year. If we're very lucky, we may get around 1.0%. For exports, we were afraid of negative export growth rates, but it turns out that we may actually have a record-breaking export this year. And for next year, right now, our growth rate seems to be projected to be about 1.8 to 2%. That's about Korea's potential growth rate. So that's what we would have, I think, in a normal year. Some people claim that it's still on a bit of a negative side because we should have had some kind of a bounce-back effect because the growth was so bad this year. But I'll settle for normal growth rate. So in some sense, we recovered pretty much from the shocks that we had at the end of this year and the beginning of this year. But we still have some problems. The high exchange rate is one of them. But also, all the problems that we had last year, the structural problems, the declining potential growth rate, they're all still there. We haven't really addressed some of these long-term problems at all. So those problems are still there, and they'll still be haunting us, I think, for the next few years.
But not as extreme as the beginning we're seeing. But now let's turn to one of the biggest events that happened this year, the Korea-U.S. tariff deal, of course, which came through in October. But some details still need to be said on that. Professor Kim, what risks still linger for our trade ties with the United States?
So clearly, the new tariff deal with the U.S. has taken a big portion of uncertainty off the table, I believe, especially for like auto industries and some of the manufacturing goods. But like you said, there are still other factors that can cause the additional layers of risk and uncertainty. So obvious thing is going to be the kind of the tension between China and the U.S. because Korea is deeply integrated into supply chains that run through both U.S. and China. So especially in terms of like some of the key areas like semiconductors, batteries, and things like that, because China has caught up a lot, and then in certain regards, they're starting sort of like, to lead in some sense. So if Washington tightens export controls on China further, or Beijing responding to these kind of things as a retaliation measures, I think Korea is going to get some hit on both sides, and this can probably increase the challenges in terms of like compliance risks, and also, from the middle side, how you are actually going to handle this is always very tricky and diplomatic, both also political as well as, of course, the business and economic issues. So I think that's going to be one thing. And as we also start seeing, European countries are also trying to tighten their security measures and also trying to use the tariff measures, kind of sort of mimicking what the Trump administration is doing. So I think that can be also a concern. And obviously, even without this U.S.-China tensions, the U.S. domestic market itself is going to be a big challenge. As a country that actually relies a lot on selling goods, I think it's going to be always a tough thing that if the political uncertainty is high, and then as we know, the U.S. actually has this, it's kind of culmination point of the political risk and uncertainty. So I think that's going to be another key variable. And as you mentioned earlier, the financial and currency conditions probably can also play roles. Now I think exchange rate is a little bit high, and also there are some other issues. So it's not always a bad thing to have this depreciated won in terms of price competitiveness, but at the same time, Korea relies a lot on importing raw materials before they sell this kind of their own products. So I think that's going to have double-edged sword, and funding costs also is going to be an issue if the exchange rate keeps deteriorating. So I think those kind of things are all some factors.
Mm-hmm. So even if the deal is in place, there's still a lot of variables in play. Now, despite the trade headwinds, South Korea is on track for a $700 billion in exports, which is a record, Professor Young. What actually powered that performance?
Okay, well, I think the biggest factor was semiconductors, partially because the U.S. is right now gung-ho on building a lot of AI data centers. There has been a really high increase in demand for these high memory bandwidth semiconductors, and that has been very helpful for Korea. In fact, most of the growth in exports have been driven by semiconductors. But also, the exports to the United States did not fall as much as we feared, partially because some of the tariffs did not go into effect. The semiconductors and some IT products are still traded with zero tariffs. Some of the tariffs did not go as high as President Trump initially threatened. He initially threatened 25% reciprocal tariffs, but in the end, it turned out to be 15%. And even those were sometimes implemented with a delay, so that helped Korea. And I think some of those delays caused the American importers to buy more, just in case President Trump did raise the tariffs to high levels. They wanted to have a lot of inventory, so in some sense they hoarded some Korean products, and that helped Korean exports. And then also, exports to other countries picked up or did not fall as much as we expected. The trade to South Asia, countries like Vietnam, has actually increased. Automobiles, which were expected to take a hit because the exports to the United States will be hit by the tariffs, but exports to third countries actually did fairly well. And also those countries, they imported a lot of Korean intermediate parts, which in turn they would use to export to other countries. That also was not affected as much as feared at the beginning of the year. On one side, we had a very good year for semiconductors. On the other side, the other exports did not fall as much as we expected, and there was also a hoarding effect by the American importers. So I think those all fed into having a very good year for trade.
Mm-hmm. Very impressive numbers we're seeing indeed. Now, meanwhile, South Korea's Kospi Index also made history this year, surpassing the 4,000 mark for the first time. Professor Kim, what actually drove that rally, and what does it say about investor sentiment?
So, when we talk about stock market, then we can always decompose that into cash flow news and discount rate news. So, meaning whether the country as a whole make enough earnings or the just creative cash flows that can sustain, that's going to push up the price. Or if the discount rate is low enough, then that's also going to push the price go up. I remember I talked about value of what are the issues about a year or a year and a half ago in this program, I think. So at that time we talked about governance issues. We also have country risk, and also we have a stiff competition with the rising competitors like the China and other countries as well, and also the political uncertainty. So all these kind of things played major role depressing and compressing the stock price of Korea. I think still we have all these lingering issues, but I think these things now mostly lift up. And then there's a broader, I think, the story about Korea's resilience in a very complicated global environment, as we just talked about, just now. So despite all these tensions and uncertainty and political issues that we have gone through, the South Korea, I think, nicely just, handle these kind of things multiple times, I think, probably coming back from 1997, 8, I think, IMF crisis, and also 2008 crisis, and also some other things, and then also the own problems that we had last year and this year, actually. So all these kind of things nicely rebounded and recovers, and then that, I think, really pushed up the investor sentiment. Of course, strategic, the sectors like the semiconductors and things like that actually get lots of the big boost because of the AI revolution. So I think that's going to also be a major factor, so that Korea is going to continue to have big dominance in semiconductor market, and also the cash flow is going to be good. Therefore, investors, I think, start becoming more positive and optimistic about the stock price, and I think that pushes up the price. Obviously, those are the fundamentals. And in terms of sentiment, I think that Korea has very huge retail investor groups, and in part because of this, the policy changes, and also the strength, I think, of the some of this governance, I think, changes and things like that, I think, push the investor sentiment a lot, I think, toward more positive zones and territories. So I think that a lot, I think, contributed to this, the huge surge, I think, in the Kospi index.
Right, quite a rally we've been seeing. In fact, some people in the security market actually say that we're also looking forward to a Kospi 5,000. Professor Young, how realistic do you think that is for next year?
Okay, for next year, I'm not sure. If I were betting, I would not bet on it. While not disagreeing with Professor Kim, I think I'm a bit less optimistic than he is. If you look at the Kospi index, how it performed this year, I think most of the high performance were due to semiconductor and AI-related stocks. If you take those stocks away, the other industries did not do very well. And the a rally on the AI and IT side, I think, were driven by the very strong AI-related investment in the United States, especially the building of AI data centers, which created a lot of demand for Korean IT products and semiconductors, and in turn drove the growth of Korean IT and AI-related stocks. But in the last few weeks, we've seen maybe some of that become less stable, partially because the U.S. is reconsidering whether AI will continue their growth. There's some talk about possible AI bubble. So in some sense, the investors are perhaps re-examining some of their AI-related investment, and foreign investors have been sort of reluctant to invest more in the Korean market. On some days, they're taking their money out. On some days, they're putting money back in, but it hasn't risen as much as it did, say, about a month or two ago. So if the U.S. rally continues in the United States, if they keep on building data centers, there is a chance that the Kospi will hit 5,000. But I think that's unlikely. It really depends on how the AI-related investment goes in the United States and how that keeps up with the semiconductor exports for Korea. And it also depends on whether the stocks of other industries will pick up. Right now, it doesn't seem like the other industries are picking up. But hopefully, if everything just works out, if people become very optimistic about the future, then there is a chance that Kospi will hit 5,000. But I think that depends too much on a very optimistic scenario. I think it's more realistic to expect that perhaps it'll hit 4,100, 4,200, and maybe remain there for a while.
So not as fast, possibly, but we're going to get there soon. Meanwhile, beyond the stock market, the BOK, it says inflation's eased to 2.1%, but the gap between the data and daily life feels wider than ever. Professor Kim, why do you think households still feel so kind of squeezed?
It's always a difficult question to answer, but then at least I think in terms of definition, the inflation itself is basically the growth rate of price level. So if I'm paying like say 1,000 won for like some goods, and if it's actually the 1,000 won, and then if the inflation is about 2%, that means like, next month or next year, it becomes 1,020 won, right? So if 1,000 won is already high, perceived as like high price, then it's going to be still high, in terms of perception. So I think mainly this is going to be like in a perception, and also of course the actual increase, because when we talk about inflation and also wage and then these kind of things, or the price level, then we use this term like stickiness. So everything seems to be very sticky, at least when we look at like the horizon of like the quarter to a year horizon, meaning the businesses or the manufacturers do not increase their price that quickly. So they just try to just use their inventory to handle these kind of things, to kind of, to maintain the price level as much as possible, because otherwise, if I only increase the price only just me, and then other manufacturers don't, then obviously my price competitiveness is going to be weakened. So I think there's kind of always kind of tug of war between when and how much actually the manufacturers will increase the prices. So it happens with lags. So given that, even if the data, which is lagging anyway, like 2% to 2.5% in terms of core inflation or the headline inflations showing very stable numbers, it doesn't mean that price is going to be perceived as low because it's already high. And also it still keeps going up. And with this lagging behavior of like a stickiness of the price adjustment and things like that, you may see certain areas actually price surging up, which is not exactly well reflected in the current price data or inflation data. So obviously the households and businesses who actually have to deal with this like in real time may feel this kind of the gap, because it's not adjusted, but it's going to be adjusted, or it's going to take over time and price is already high. And given that, I think also the very high level of the household debt burden is going to also play a role, because like I said, the wage is also sticky. So my wage is not going up. I already have like high amount of the debt, and then price is still high and doesn't go down. So I will feel very burdened. So I think that's probably what it is. And I think it's probably going to take time. At least the good news is inflation numbers are good. That means in the next quarter or two, we're not going to see too much of a burden as it is now, I believe.
Let's hope for that. In fact,
one
of the major variables that's also affecting inflation trends is the $1 exchange rate, which had spiked past 14.80, but suddenly dropped to the 14.40s today after a strong intervention by the FX authorities. Professor Young, do you think this signals a lasting stabilization trend?
Okay, I don't think so, but there's a possibility. So let me give you some reasons why. The foreign exchange authorities made verbal intervention or jawboning, and they introduced some policies, but I don't think they intervened in the market directly. They did not go out and buy or sell currency directly. Now, the way that the verbal intervention works is that if there's sort of a bubble component to the prices, so people are expecting prices to go up just because price has been going up, verbal intervention can work. But if the rise in prices is due to real demand, in this case, the numbers seems to show that the reason that the won has depreciated so much is that a lot of Korean investors, both institutional and individual investors, have been buying dollars to in turn buy U.S. stocks because U.S. stock market has been doing so incredibly well because of the AI rally. Now, if most of the depreciation for the won is because of that real demand, then I don't think this verbal intervention or most of the policies that the government has introduced will have a lot of effect. But if this continual depreciation of the won has built up an expectational bubble. As I said, people are raising prices just because prices have risen in the past and they keep on expecting the price to increase in the future, then the verbal intervention will, I think, have a fairly good effect. We've only seen the effect for a day so far, and tomorrow's Christmas, so there won't be any trading. But in the next week, if most of the prices were due to, most of the depreciation was due to the bubble, then that should work itself out with the verbal intervention. But if most of it was due to real demand, then I don't think this verbal intervention will work much. The exchange rate will go back to where it was yesterday in about a week or so. In a sense, we'll have to wait and see, but my suspicion is that it's more due to real demand than bubble. So we will see the rates depreciating again, at least until the stock rally in the U.S. slows down or stops.
Thank you for the clarification, Professor Young. So we'll have to see until the next few days and beyond. But as for now, we will have to conclude the discussion right here. Thank you so much for your insights tonight, Professor Young.
Thank you.
And of course, Professor Kim, we really appreciate it.
Always a pleasure.
And that'll be all from us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in again next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Till then, stay informed and engaged.